Now, Pavarotti was a good friend.
Hello, and welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions, and I'm not here to slander, so let's get started. This is the last episode in my series on the bonus evidence against Bryan Kohberger. And this episode, we're going to dive into the IGG. And we're going to look at it in two ways. First, the IGG, according to all the documentation we can find, is impossible to have actually been created by the time that Kohberger's name was injected into the investigation. No way. And that's why in all the court proceedings you'll hear Ann Taylor say, I cannot figure out, based on the discovery that's been provided to me, Your Honor, how law enforcement got to Bryan Kohberger. There's nothing in the discovery that says this is what injected Bryan Kohberger into the investigation. And they slyly say on the side, well, it was the IGG. It pointed to him as a lead. But they won't provide any documentation of that. And that's simple, because if they provide all of the, I won't say any, they provided an outline and some notes jotted down by the FBI. But if they were to provide all of the documentation, then it would clearly show that the IGG had not been completed by the time that Kohberger was injected into the investigation. Probably not by the time he was arrested. So that is a very shady way of the law enforcement in the investigation trying to cover up the real reason that they got to Kohberger, which was a confidential informant statement. And Ann Taylor knows this, and that's why she's trying to bring it into the light, because she wants a confidential informant statement that had to be on the affidavit for probable cause in the search for Kohberger's telephone, because that's the only way a judge would have signed off on it. She wants to be able to directly confront that confidential informant in court, because once a confidential informant is presented in court, they're no longer a confidential informant. They're now a cooperating witness. And that's when she can attack the cooperating witness's informant's reliability. Because without the informant being reliable, the initial search warrant for the 8458 phone number should have never actually been allowed by the court. And if they were unable to get the search warrant for the 8458 phone number, then all the other evidence that they used to arrest Bryan Kohberger, obtain his buccal swab, and search his apartment, his parents' home, all that would be negated, because without the 8458 phone number search warrant, they wouldn't have his historical phone records or his cast history on location. So literally the only thing they would have is grainy photo of a vehicle that looked similar to his in an area where he didn't live. And that would certainly not be good enough for an arrest warrant. So it's very important for her to uncover things in this manner. But as I go into this IGG today, I'm going to show you some other shocking facts about how the defense is preparing their case to attack the DNA profile in general with use of the IGG. But before we get into that, I'm going to need to show you what an IGG profile consists of and how it can be manipulated in a case such as this to match up DNA samples that shouldn't have been matched up and were matched up improperly. So let's take a look. All of the information I'm about to provide comes from the National Library of Medicine, the National Center for Biotechnology Information. And the first article I will cite is from the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, dealing with touch DNA or transfer DNA. There's many names for it. And you can see it says touch DNA samples are generally known to contain low levels of DNA in the presence of degraded genetic material. We need to remember that for later. Regardless of its origin, makes genotype detection challenging. So let's keep in mind degraded genetic material and genotype detection, because those are going to come up over and over. And again, relating with the touch DNA, this is the presence of small amounts of genetic material available, sometimes even below the minimum thresholds of modern highly sensitive commercial STR kits like they would use at the lab in the Idaho State Police lab there, is another phenomenon commonly found in contact samples. In this contingency, PCR amplification can miss the detection of short DNA fragments. So that's something else we need to remember. PCR amplification, because that's how they amplify the DNA in an STR analysis so that they can type the genomes. And with the PCR amplification missing the detection of short DNA fragments, it makes typing those genomes almost impossible, as we will learn here in a minute. Now, this next article is going to be from the European Journal of Human Genetics, and it's going to relate specifically to the investigative genetic genealogy or forensic genetic genealogy. There's different words for it. And you can see it says in many forensic settings, identity of DNA sample is sought from poor quality DNA, which again would be like the touch DNA, for which the typical STR loci tabulated in forensic databases such as CODIS are not possible to reliably genotype. And remember, the STR, they need 20 of the human genomes to get an accurate match. So we use genetic record matching to evaluate the possibility of testing SNP profiles obtained from poor quality DNA samples to identify exact and relatedness matches to STR profiles. So this is how they're jumping over from an STR profile that doesn't have enough of the 20 genomes to reliably match it to the CODIS database, and they're using samples from the SNP profile. But you can see it using simulations based on whole genome sequences. We show that in some settings, similar match accuracies to those seen with full coverage of the genome are obtained by genetic record matching for SNP data that represents 5 to 10% genomic coverage. So basically, they use the SNP profile and they simulate it based on whole genome sequences to fill in the gaps of the STR profile, then submit it for matching. So they're simulating and filling in the gaps with simulations. So it's not a real match. It says the identity of a DNA profile is often sought from a biological sample with poor DNA quality, for which standard molecular techniques used with high quality samples are unlikely to successfully produce genotypes. So that means there are 20 genotypes that they got from the STR sample of the knife sheath originally were probably not all there. When the sample originates from trace sources such as burned, degraded, remember what we learned a minute ago, that the touch DNA often contains degraded DNA samples, or ancient materials, only limited portions of the original genome might remain in the sample. So again, their original STR sample from the touch DNA on the knife sheath did not contain the 20 genomes required to submit into CODIS for a match. And routine genotyping of short tandem repeat, again, that's the STR, assumes that high-quality DNA samples contain DNA fragments in long sections of sequence. Remember, the long sections of sequence, that's what it said in touch DNA. that you could not see the long sections of sequence. So hence, in a high quality sample, the polymerase chain reaction can amplify the fragments that contain the entire section of DNA. Remember, we talked about amplification a minute ago in the touch DNA, that when you amplify it, it does not show you the long fragments. And that's what's necessary to generate the 20 genomes. So the amplification relies on the inclusion of both the primers and the fragment connecting them, which contains an STR region in the DNA sample. So they take the SNP profile and they use it to simulate the long DNA fragments and then insert it into the STR profile originally created, and that's the only way that they could match it to a suspect or a suspect's relative, as I'll show you here in a minute. For degraded DNA samples, and remember, the touch DNA contains degraded DNA samples. However, the standard STR genotyping procedures can be unlikely to succeed. DNA fragments in the biological sample might be short and scattered. So remember, short, they're looking for the long DNA fragments, and that's how they do the genotypes for the STR, but the touch DNA doesn't allow them to find the long fragments because of degraded samples. So that is improbable that both primers and the DNA between them are present to be amplified. Nevertheless, although STR genotyping might fail, next generation sequencing might be capable of producing genotypes of the available fragments. So, there again, simulating the long fragments and inserting them into the STR profile to be able to match it. And you can see down here it says, the STR loci that underlie standard forensic databases that are genotyped by amplifying specific genomic sites are unlikely to be obtained from the sample of interest, nor is any specific target set of SNPs. Thus, when an investigator seeks to query an unknown degraded sample, again, touch DNA contains degraded samples, for a match to an STR genotype of a known individual or relative, so to Kohberger or his dad, or to search an STR profile database for a match, like CODIS. The fragmentary genotypes represent different and apparently incommensurable genetic loci from those available for potential matches. So them not being able to complete the 20 genomes in the original STR profile makes it impossible for them to match it to Kohberger or his dad unless they took simulated information from the SNP profile and inserted it into that STR profile. That's the only way they could have done it, folks. Now, Ann Taylor and Becca Barlow, they're more than familiar with this already. As you can see, this is in their response to the IGG back last year. And they talk about, additionally, the defense team has discussed the use of statistics in this type of case with experts who have informed the defense counsel that the manner of identifying Mr. Kohberger via this type of search may have significant impacts on the statistical analysis of the CODIS profile generated by the Idaho State Police Lab. Without access to the actual genetic genealogy search methods and results, it's impossible for qualified experts to address these issues. So because the prosecution will not turn over all of the investigative material into the IGG search, including generating the profile and any records related to them inserting data from the profile into the original STR profile. They won't turn over any of that to the defense. So the defense cannot properly prepare their case against this specific aspect because they can't verify that they did or did not do what I've just described in this video. So again, anything that you hide from the defense, you're not hiding it because it was on the up and up. You're hiding it because there's something in there you don't want them to know. Folks, this is what they don't want them to know. The match to Kohberger and his father could not have been done without information from the SNP profile being simulated, then inserted into the STR profile. So that match means absolutely nothing. All of their DNA evidence in this case, including the IGG and the buccal swab match, should be suppressed before this trial due to non-disclosure of information that would allow them to verify that the samples were not manipulated in this manner discussed by the European Journal of Medical Sciences. And that's a fact. Now, one piece of bonus evidence I forgot to bring up, but guilters like to bring this up often, and that is the Dickies tag found in Kohberger's apartment. Well, because the eyewitness identification of the suspect in the house, DM, did not specify that the perpetrator was wearing Dickies brand clothing, then there is absolutely zero corroborating evidence that ties a Dickies brand anything to the actual crime on King Road. So tags found in Kohberger's apartment during the search of his apartment would 1000% be suppressed before the trial and would never make it into the trial as evidence against Bryan Kohberger, because there is nothing tying Dickies anything to the atrocity on King Road. So in completion of this series, folks, here's what we have completed. We have eliminated the STR DNA from the sheath matched to Kohberger. That should be suppressed. Vehicle identification of the Elantra at King Road. Again, suppressed. Kohberger's physical description by DM. Again, suppressed. Cast data consistent with the Elantra movements the night of the atrocity. We have destroyed it. Suppressed. Cast data showing 12 trips to cell coverage area of King Road prior to the atrocity. We have destroyed it. Get rid of it. Suppressed. The DoorDash driver. We have proven that that will be the alibi. The confidential informant. That one needs to be uncovered, brought to light so that it can be eliminated with reliability of the informant. The IGG, decimated, not even going to be brought up in court anyways. And then last but not least, the Dickies tag, which certainly would be inadmissible in court. So, if this is all of the evidence they have against Bryan Kohberger, they have no evidence. Zero against Bryan Kohberger. All the guilters out there suggest that there's a lot of evidence that we haven't seen. Well, folks, they better have a lot, and they better be able to produce it, because everything we know they have, we have one by one absolutely decimated it. It should not even be allowed in trial, and may not. So let's say, at the very least, that everything was legitimate. It was on the up and up. Then they need to produce every single record of how they got the SNP profile generated. What did they use to generate that profile? Where did they get that DNA? Now, they specified in their court records it was from a K-bar knife, not a knife sheath. So they need to provide all that documentation. They need to show how they built the family tree, They need to show every relative that was on that family tree that matched that SNP profile. Because if they're not hiding anything and everything's legitimate, turn it over to the defense. Let them see it. Anytime that they hide something from you, they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart or to protect any kind of, constitutional rights. No, when they hide something from you on the prosecution, when they had evidence the prosecution used to generate anything from the defense, it's only because something was done in a nefarious manner or it wasn't done at all and they claim it was done. So I know the IGG and the DNA starts to get convoluted and confusing, but if you were able to follow me on that, I think it should generate even more questions in your mind than provide answers. But that's the end of this series. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Until next time, Pavarotti's out.